Well, hello and welcome to our live author chat. I am Caren Simpson McVicker, and we are sort of celebrating the book birthday of my novel Henderson House, which will be a year old tomorrow. Woohoo, which is so exciting. But I was really excited. One of the great things that's happened over the past year is I've made a lot of new author friends. So I was thrilled that two of my new friends could join me to celebrate tonight. So I'm here with Stephen Harrison, whose book, The Editors, comes out in 13 days on August 13th. And Sonja Roberts, whose debut novel, House of the Broken Promise, is in production at Inkshares. So we're all actually at the same publisher. That's sort of how we met. Um, but Stephen is a writer and a tech lawyer based in Dallas. His fiction and nonfiction pieces have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wired, and Slate Magazine. And for the past 5 years, he has penned the column Source Notes about Wikipedia and the world of facts and the internet. And as I said, The Editors is Stephen's debut novel. And the blurb I found on that was most infopendium editors are volunteers, but billionaires and governments are paying hired gun editors to change the content of the web encyclopedia. On the cusp of a global pandemic, the editors must race to defend the truth against disinformation. And the Washington Post recently said, a striking, relevant, and compelling suspense novel with the pace of a thriller and the heart of a drama, Harrison exposes the unseen battles fought in the digital trenches of today's information war. So very exciting, Stephen. I think you
Thank
have a hit
you.
on your
Yeah.
hands.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
I already had someone message me, how do I order his book? So
Yay!
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. And Sonja Roberts, Sonja somehow finds herself middle-aged despite having the sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy. When she's not writing, she can be found keeping her children alive and resenting her dogs, all of whom she spoils. And Sonja's debut novel, House of the Broken Promise, is in production and has been described as the good wife meets I don't know how she does it. And her blurb for her novel, Anna is a new mother in a new town living in a gutted house. When her husband is killed in a car accident with his mistress, she struggles to move forward and soon discovers that the affair wasn't all her husband had lied about. So we have technology suspense, we have contemporary suspense on the home front. So some very different novels. Here I am writing heartwarming historical fiction, but I'm so excited to talk with both of you. So we had reached out through my newsletter and asked for some questions, and we got some really great questions. So the first one is, what are your life hacks to juggle all your projects? Because Stephen, obviously you wear a lot of hats, Sonia, you wear a lot of hats. I know I wear a lot of hats. So let's share some life hacks with our readers. Stephen, how do you get it all done?
Oh man. Well, I think in some ways I'm kind of becoming my grandfather. When I was a teenager, especially, and I like to sleep in, I was like, why does my grandfather wake up so early? But now I just that's the only way I can do it is to wake up pretty early and I have to write before work because once I get it in the mode at work, the idea of staring at a screen and writing late into the night, that just doesn't really appeal to me. And I have a day job. I'm a corporate day job at Shutterfly, where a lot of people get their Christmas cards and things like that. So I guess life hack would be waking up early and paying myself first. And paying myself for me means writing first, because that's the thing I'm really most excited about. And then also sometimes handwriting. I think that sometimes I get really just staring at a screen too much, and I can just think in a very different way if I handwrite. And I've got them here. I've got my Muji pens, which is my favorite pen brand. But so two life hacks that I have. Yeah.
Okay, I like it. Sonia, what about you?
well, it's interesting. Mine aren't much different. For me, if I don't write first thing in the morning, it probably isn't going to happen because my brain gets tired. So I'm with Stephen on that one. And I started my novel while I was still working in corporate America on my lunch hour, handwriting in a legal notepad. So I guess we're very similar
That's
in
right.
that
Yeah, yeah.
regard. And I think the balance is really, it's difficult. So as I've gone through the past 2 years, trying to make this happen. It's a struggle. And so you either believe in it enough to keep going forward and trying, or you want a nap. And sometimes I really just want a nap, but but we get there eventually. So
Yeah. All right. So I have a nap life hack, which is this
ooh,
thing called NSDR. It's non-sleep deep rest. It's sort of like a guided yoga nidra, but it's only like 24 minutes.
okay.
And it's just like a relaxation, but you really do wake up feeling like you took a whole nap. And so you can do it awake, or sometimes you can fall asleep. And my husband and I we really believe in it. Like I've done it in airports. He's pulled over on the side of the road, like when he's
Wow.
tired, to just get that nap.
NSDR. That was
NSDR.
called.
I'll send you.
NSDR.
There are a
Okay.
bunch of them out there. I can send you the one that I really like. So I think for me, I'm in a little bit of a different phase because I'm older, and I was actually able to phase out my business. I had a social media and marketing company here in Vermont, and I kind of decided I really wanted to write full time. So I'm in this phase where I'm trying to build a literary life, like figure out what is my life like as a writer. I'm an empty nester, so I'm kind of at a different life stage. So one of the things that's interesting is I believed I had to write first thing. I had to get up, put the butt in the chair and get the word count out. And then this summer I saw Anna Quinlan speak, and she was saying she actually she made a shift, and she started walking in the morning, but not walking with any music or listening to anything, walking and kind of getting organized around her day. And then she got that exercise in first and then would sit down. And so I've been trying to do that. And I really like it. And it was very different. I live in a beautiful place. Walking in Vermont in the summer is
Hmm.
not really a hardship.
Yeah.
Actually, what I
So
do, I walk my dogs first. I didn't think of
yeah,
that, but yeah, I
yeah,
walk them first, and then
yeah.
So
And so that's new for me because I was definitely grab the coffee, sit down, get started.
mhm.
And I think it's still working okay. I mean, I'm in an editing phase right now. I'm not doing so much writing. We'll see. Sometimes that writing. And I guess, life hacks for me, juggling everything. Uh, I am a word count person. Like when I know I need to get stuff done, I have spreadsheets, I'm tracking word count. I was a technical writer in a former life where I had to write, 700-page books explaining limited release software packages and that sort of thing. So I think if someone out there is listening who wants to be a writer, embrace the word count. I know for me personally, when I pushed myself, I thought, oh, 500 words a day would get the novel done. And then when I realized I wanted to try and write 1,000 words a day, at least 5 days a week, that was a game changer.
Yeah.
So those would be my life hacks. Um, so another question that came in for us, and I think this is great given that you have these kind of suspense novels, and also given your work history, Stephen, are where do you get the ideas for your books? And are any of the people mentioned in them based on real people you know? So, Stephen, take us out on that one.
Right. Well, I do think I kind of gravitate a little bit towards setting. And maybe it's a setting that I've interacted with a lot, like Wikipedia, or this latest one that I'm working on is about the Federal Reserve System, and
Oh.
I worked at the Fed briefly, so maybe it is something from life. I have a hard time with real people, and I think I try to avoid making real people characters because you find that they kind of just it's sort of like an imitation, or and
Mm,
almost you need the character almost needs to make more sense than people, if that makes sense. Like you need to a character needs to have a backstory and motivations, and sometimes you meet people and you don't actually know why they're that way. They just are. So I think it's better to create and develop a character than use real life. But sometimes the characters end up being composites of different things that you've seen.
hmm Yeah, I think that's true. And Sonia, what about you? Where did you come up for this story?
Well, for me, I'm a sort of extreme empath. So I'm someone who hears about something that has happened to someone or knows someone that something has happened to, and then I think about, holy cow, what would I do if that happened to me? And how would I feel? Um, and then for me, I take those emotions and then put it in a setting where it even brings it up to another level of emotion. So
Mm.
that's where I go from, because I think there's so many, in the case of my novel, House of Broken Promise, there's so many solo parents out there. But then, and having a kid just to begin with, even in the best of circumstances, is hard. But then you take away the spouse, and that's hard. And then you add some betrayal in, and then that's even worse. And then you add in some other stuff that happens, and and you think, what would I do and how would I feel?
Mm.
So I sort of put myself in the shoes of my character as far as all of the feels, and try to emulate that and see how far I can push it. But that's where I come from.
Yeah. And I think for me, I had, two different situations happen in that, I first had the idea to write something about my great aunt Boo Boo, my grandma Simpson, when I was 15. That was the first time I thought that I should write about them. And, and it took me, 40 years to get it done. So that first book was, I wouldn't say it wasn't about real people, but it was inspired by
Sure.
real people. And, the setting, that it's set in Bartlesville, that it's set in a boarding house, all of that came from real family stories. But what was interesting is that the second book totally came from a different place, because I had created those characters. And even though it's a sequel, it's now it's really kind of born of those characters, which I think was really interesting. And I never set out to have a sequel. It's just the way it ended. There was still unfinished business. So that was really different. And the third book that I'm working on is completely, it's set here in Vermont. And yeah, and that was just, I think sometimes you just have these ideas and they kind of stick with you. We had rented a house on a lake that had kind of this creepy boathouse. And I was like, oh, that it kind of stuck with me. And then, the story just kind of grows. So that one's different. And that'll be dual timeline. So that's going to be kind of fun. So I don't know. And I don't know where the next one will come, but I'm really happy I have a third one going.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
That's good. And Dorothy was just chiming in. She's on the call and saying she had seen an interview with Kate Quinn and Janie Chang, who co-authored The Phoenix Crown. And they talked a lot about using spreadsheets, making sure they don't overlook things or shortchange each other, because they were writing together. And she knows we have talked about, I'm a big spreadsheet user.
Right. Yeah.
When
I
I'm
sometimes
writing.
use the spreadsheet, I think, because I briefly worked at a law firm, and that taught you to like keep track of your time. And I was like, okay, well,
Yeah.
at least got in, an hour and a half today and stuff like that. I don't always do that, but that's kind of what I do at the time. But like, also, I'd like to try what you said with the word count of a certain number.
Yeah. It's interesting.
The word count is how
Uh,
I am the least analytical person in the world. So spreadsheet for me is overwhelming.
Yeah.
The word count seems achievable. So
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'm happy to send you any blank templates if you're
please do.
interested. I have many. So
You can convert me.
yeah, I don't, it's all just offering, no conversion. So a bunch of people ask very similar questions on who inspired you to become a writer. Did you always want to be a writer? So let's talk about some of that, Stephen. I mean, you obviously are writing for business anyway, but is there anything you can look at in your past that made you always want to have a novel out there with your name on it?
Yeah, I think I did. I think that when I was a kid, I read like the Indian in the Cupboard series, and I was like, I just kind of
That's a good one.
extended it. I just did like fan fiction in that world, and I did
Oh,
just for fun. And but then I did find my mom found something in a time capsule that said, and this would have been first grade, to become my life's ambition was to become a author. So I was almost there. I didn't know the and versus a rule, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh, that's funny.
I think so. Yeah.
And what about you, Sonja?
I, yeah, I think the creative gene was always there. I was always writing as a kid, writing stories, making my poor parents listen to these horrible stories I wrote. And then in college, I was a theater major, so that was my creative outlet. But that is not a lasting career for most people. And I found in corporate America, I needed that outlet. And so I turned back to writing. I'd been writing the whole way through, keeping journals and travels and all those things. And I still have imposter syndrome, thinking, why does anyone want to read what I have to say? But
Yeah.
I feel there are told valuable stories.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
I think it was needed to come out of me, and we'll see if anyone else cares. And if they don't, then that's okay too.
it's still coming out. I mean, once there's a story in you that you need to tell, you really can't not get it out there. I think it becomes like a mission.
How
And
about
it's
you?
funny. Well, sometimes I would be like, so I guess, yeah, I think I always was a writer. I laugh that I have like a box of very old sort of memories, and I actually have like the mimeographed copy of like the sixth grade newspaper that had sort of my first article in the Franklin Times from my elementary school. So, but I did a lot of different writing like you. I wrote songs. I was a pretty big singer-songwriter in middle school and in high school. And I wrote short stories and plays. And then when I went to college, it was my intention to be a creative writing major. And then I changed to public relations and advertising, which still used a lot of writing, but I was worried about getting a job.
Yeah.
And but I did still get to take some great classes. I was an English minor. But when I sat down to write Henderson House, I hadn't written fiction in 40 some years. So that was a big deal. Maybe even 50 years. Boy, I'm getting old. But yeah, it had been a while. But I also think the reading, I grew up on the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie books. And I remember really clearly the summer that I discovered the Anne McCaffrey, like Dragon Riders of Pern.
I read those too. Yeah.
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 I was like, you
Yeah.
can do this with a book,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just like tore through those. I mean, so I've always just read anything, all genres, anything I can get my hands on. So,
Yeah.
um, and I think it's an interesting book that is kind of like one of those light bulb memory books for me. Is actually The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver, which is one of her very first little novels that came out, and it has a young Cherokee girl in it, and that was. I had this idea that I was going to write my story. And when I read The Bean Trees, it really was a time when that idea came back to me like, hey, remember like you were going to write a story. And if you haven't read those early novels of hers, they're really great. They're very short, but she was a great, all all the signs of greatness were there in terms of her as a storyteller when she put those first novels out. Probably I think in like the late 1980s those came out. So very fun. Okay. Stephen, do you have any favorite places to write?
Well, if you see me looking over there, I've got two different desks. This is my work desk, and that's my writing desk over there.
That's funny.
It's not that much better, except it looks out the window, and I think it's just. But I sometimes write in coffee shops. I think that actually I found that I was like better at like editing in coffee shops and maybe writing like first thing in the morning. It's kind of a different. And I did give a shout out in the back of my book to the coffee shop, the staff there, and they all get arcs and that kind of stuff because they were always asking how is the book, and they're super nice about
That's
it.
great.
So yeah.
That's awesome. Sonia, do you have a favorite place to write?
Well, any place my dogs will be quiet, really, is my favorite place to write. So I live in a small town in Maine. We don't have a coffee shop that opens really early enough for me to go be comfortable there. Our library doesn't open until 10, so it's usually a battle between me and the dogs to create a quiet space. So often it's in my house. When I really have to get serious, I disappear to a little cabin on the mid coast of Maine and write for 3 days straight. And it's, 10 to 12-hour days. And that probably really is my favorite place to write. But those opportunities are few and
That
far
sounds
between
pretty
because
great.
it
Yeah.
is. Or in the Finger Lakes of New York, which is there's a little house there that I rent.
That's nice.
But yeah, but that's like, Hallmark movie type of writing, which doesn't
happen all the time.
frequently.
Yeah.
The rest of it is really gritted out, yelling at the dogs. That's pretty much.
Yeah. And so I have a little office above our kitchen. We live in a very old house in Vermont that the center section was built in like the late 1770s, but the kitchen was probably built around 1900. So my little office that I'm in now is above our kitchen. And in the summertime, we have a little cabin up the hill that I love. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see lots of pictures of me writing in the cabin. And that's probably my favorite place to write. But I think I'm with Steven a little bit. Like sometimes I do better in public with the headphones on. Like when I need to crank, and I'm very lucky that I have a lot of great coffee shops near me where I
In
can go.
Vermont, yeah.
Yeah, and we have Northshire bookstores here in Manchester. It's one of the finest independent bookstores, like really in the world, and has a cafe, and it's pretty great. There's another coffee shop right next to it. Sometimes I have done like the coffee shop version of a pub crawl when I'm really working on something. Like I'll go to one, and then when I need a break, I'll walk to another, and then end up at the library. So I've done that. But I have found it's interesting for me if I'm writing a difficult scene, maybe something that's emotionally difficult or sad, I almost do better writing that in public with the headphones on. Like I think at home, maybe it's just you talked about being an empath. Maybe it's just too powerful to write some of that at home. So it's, I've definitely made myself cry in coffee shops, at least with the second book, not so much in Henderson House. But okay, so now this one is fun. This is a two-parter. They want to know what was the worst part of writing your book, and then what was the best part of writing your book. So, Stephen, that's a good question. What was
Yeah,
the worst part, and then what was the best part? I like that question.
I do like that question. Well, I think so. So sort of worst part, although I'd say there are a lot of good aspects to it, is I had a pretty long revision process with Inkshares. I think we're just trying to make the pacing the best we could be and kind of connect all these different perspectives. And because the contest, I think that, yeah, I mean, you might remember, I think it ended,
Yeah. The end of
early 2020.
February.
Yeah,
Early
21.
February end of February 2021.
Right. And we
Yeah.
didn't even have the firm publication date until December 23. So just going on 21, 22, 23, a lot of editing, to make the book.
It's a lot of editing.
And
Yeah.
and so I said, but I also say the best part was, I mean, I was kind of I'm a mix of a pantser and a planner. I think I generally plan, but there was just one piece that I didn't know how it would come together, and it kind of did come together. And I that was kind of a cool, I don't know, more intuitive moment than I've had sometimes. So yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And Sonia, I know you're still in the thick of it, but so far, what's been the worst part?
Steven's
and what's
making me
been the
feel
best part?
better because I feel like my developmental editing is taking forever, and most of that is my fault because I'm working on this other project, but also because I think it went in pretty rough. Rougher than I thought it was. I mean, I'd had beta readers, I'd done all those things who people said it's reading great, but the editor at Inkshares is very particular, and I love that. So it makes me really work hard to craft each sentence and each scene to make sure it's there can't be anything pointless when it comes there's no fluff, and you better make sure it's working. So for me as a non-analytical person, that sometimes is difficult because I'm like, can we just move on already, because I've my brain's kind of tired of that part. So that part is hard, but also really rewarding to feel like you've figured it out. And the other part of the question was what's been the easiest part?
The best part. The worst part and best part.
Oh, I think the best feeling, I remember finishing the draft and just feeling like, okay, it's all out. Like I've, verbal diarrhea and all of this stuff. Finally, it's all in one place. And I knew there was still a lot more work to be done. But to have that starting point of a project finally, after years and years, come together, I think to me that was the most rewarding part so far. But I think
That's great.
best rewarding part, and Stephen, you tell me, I think it's coming, and you would know too, Caren. I think that part's coming with publication.
Yeah, when it comes out. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, along the same lines, I think the worst part was of writing it. The worst part of writing it. I think the worst part of writing the book was I finished a first draft, and so this was like the very, very first draft, like you said, and I wanted to get some feedback because I wanted to get some beta readers, because I'm like, I didn't know, like it could be like really horrible. And let me tell you, that first draft was a far cry from what ended up getting published. And so I was finding some women here in my town who were willing to read it. And this one woman that I am friends with and I really admire offered to read it. And I was terrified to give it to her because she was just, I knew this is like someone who holds no punches. Like she is going to give it to me straight. And I like remember going to drop it off at her house. And it was like ding dong ditch. You know, I was like going to ring the doorbell and drop it and run away because I was so afraid to give it to her. She ended up loving it. But that moment of fear, and you talked about imposter syndrome, like it was a fear I'm not sure that I've ever experienced before. Like you're so vulnerable giving it to other people to read. So
You're right on. I think the most vulnerable thing is giving your work to somebody.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that was probably the worst part. And the best part, boy, there's so many best parts now. You have all this to look forward to. What was like the best part? Well, in the writing piece, I think the best part was that I loved the developmental editing process because I just wanted it to be the best it could be. And I was really surprised by that. I thought I was going to bristle at the criticism and be all angry and, angsty the whole time. And I actually really loved it. So that was just a surprise. But I do think some of the best parts are total strangers who really connect with the book and reach out to you or leave a review. And especially because this is historical fiction, sometimes this book reminds people of their own grandparents or, a lot of people, there's a lot of scenes in the kitchen with the women, and that brought back a lot of great memories for people of their grandmother. And, like, oh, my grandmother always had celery on a plate, just those little details that you put in. So I do think that is one of the best things about writing is, you're writing your story, you really have no control how people are going to connect with it. And sometimes they connect with it in really unexpected and beautiful ways. So, I think that was sort of one of the best parts. Okay. In hindsight, is there any part of the book you would change or a character you would develop differently? Ooh, Stephen, this is a good one for you on the
Oh man.
eve of your release.
Well, I Goodreads reviews. I would talk about giving your work to people. Someone I think flipped. I have a character named Morgan and I have a character named Nevin, and I picked those names for a couple different reasons. But a reader, I think, maybe flipped the two characters, and I was thinking, well, I could have done, and they do advise writers to do this. Different letters, and then also just make sure they don't sound too similar.
Yeah.
I don't really think that many other readers will have that issue where they flip Morgan and Nevin, but it is something that I might do differently next time.
Okay. All right, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Sonja, you're in the middle where you can still
Yeah.
change things.
I'm
Anything?
not qualified to answer this question. So I'll pass and send it to you.
Okay.
Karen.
Yeah, I don't know. Like boy, I mean, there are a lot of parts of my book that are relatively like new to me in that there was so much growth at the end, and you've probably both experienced that. And, there was so Bessie Blackwell, who's our spinster, falling in love with this divorced man, and she had kind of given up on love. I knew her whole backstory. Like I knew everything that had happened to her to make her the way she is. But not all of that was in the book. And Inkshares actually shared the book with our Ingram marketing person very close to the end of the developmental editing process. And they had two comments. One was, I love a good boarding house tale as much as the next person. Why doesn't it start with Mrs. Henderson interviewing Frank? Which it used to, and then that had gotten removed. And so I told Noah, I was like, oh, I have that chapter. It needs to be updated, but we could put that back in. But then the other thing was they wanted to really understand why Bessie had shut the door on love, and locked it and thrown away the key. So I went back in and I actually did add that. And that was a fascinating experience as a writer because you didn't just like add it in there. Like it had tentacles, like it went through the whole novel. It even changing, word choices. Like she was a different person now because we knew about her pain. And like, so when she closed the windows in her office, they made a different sound. Like it was weird to me as a writer, like how that changed everything. So I feel like in some ways I did go in and change someone right there at the end. So to me, that feels like that was a really new part of the book. It doesn't to the
Yeah.
reader, but to me that happened sort of right at the end. Okay, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting all of these. We have so many questions. I'm trying to get all the. Oh, this is a fun one. So have you met anyone on your writing journey that has made any kind of a special impression on you? Anybody has made a special impression on you during your writing journey? Dorothy's on the call, so I can say Dorothy Minor has been made a great impression on me. But I would say, I have had incredible bookstore experiences because I did go out and do a lot of events. And the team at Magic City Books in Tulsa, Oklahoma that's just an incredible place and an incredible group of people. And almost like all the people I've met at independent bookstores, just their support and cheerleading, and I am a no name old lady writer with
Not
like a
anymore.
tiny indie press, but no, I am.
Mhm.
And they treated me the same as I think they would have like any author, that came in. It was really amazing. So I think just like indie bookstore people in general and librarians, I mean, all around, like just the bookish community is really great. It's the best. Stephen, anyone yet?
Well, maybe it's just because you're right here, that sort of availability bias. But we talked just about a year ago, and then 6 months
Yep.
ago, and your advice on the business and making connections,
Oh,
like you said, with the book community and especially the indie bookstores, I think has been really helpful, and I've been admiring from afar for a long time. So I'm
thanks,
excited.
Stephen.
Yeah.
What about what's going for you, Sonja?
Well, it's funny. So my initial reaction was very different from where you two went with this question. But I will say, the kindness of other writers. I mean, there can often be this competitive feel to the whole, I don't want to say industry, but the creative process where you feel like there's only a limited number of spaces to get published in, and you're competing and you read other people's stuff and you immediately have an inferiority complex, or why couldn't I come up with an idea that's that complex, or why couldn't I do this? But I found that most writers that I have met are so gracious and willing to share their time and willing to promote. And there have been a few I've met that aren't that way.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly in the Inksters community, people are so giving of their time and expertise, but also just their support. I was thinking of one agent I pitched to early on who her feedback to me was, I don't like your main character. And that was all she said to me. She
Wow.
didn't say why, and she didn't have much more than that, but she said, I don't like your main character. She's weak, something along those lines. And for me, my main character was this really strong woman who was, raising this child on her own and doing all these things.
Yeah.
And so that stuck with me. And I'm the type of person that gets pissed off when somebody says something like that. So that sort of lit the fire in me to make it very clear who my character was. Like if she wasn't seeing it, then I needed to do a better job. So even though her comment perhaps wasn't meant kindly, it actually helped me a great deal. So I guess that would be my answer to that question.
That's a big impression. No,
Yeah.
I love that. Well, you guys have been so great. I don't want to take up like too much more of anybody's time, but we had said we were gonna pick our winners live tonight. So, like another tip, if you guys don't use it, is the random number generator. Everybody got that on their
Yeah.
phone?
Yeah.
You gotta have the
No.
random number.
Oh,
No.
Yeah, so you just put in random number generator,
Okay.
and then so I can just put in like the number of people who sent in the questions. And then I'm going to generate. Okay, so, this is perfect, Stephen, because this is my friend Anne Graham, and
okay.
she sent in the question about the life hacks for juggling.
Yeah.
But she also had some questions for you that I'll send to you because she's really interested in the book, and she's in my writers group here in Manchester. So Anne Graham is winning the signed copy of The Editors from Stephen Harrison.
Oh,
She will
yay.
be
Wonderful. Yeah. Uh-huh.
so thrilled. That's perfect. Okay, and then I'm giving away a fun adult coloring book with some, because we figure everyone already has Henderson House. And the second prize, goes to Nancy Woodall, who sent in the question about, in hindsight, was there any part of the book you would have changed? So that's great. Congratulations to our winners, Anne and Nancy. We will get everybody connected via email. And this has been, I can't think of a nicer way to celebrate the eve of my book birthday than with two new friends that I wouldn't have if I wasn't doing this. And I'm really so excited for both of your books to get out there and fly. Stephen, I don't know. I think you really have something on your hands. It's a great
Yeah.
book.
I bet
It's,
you get optioned, my friend.
Oh, fingers crossed. I don't know. It's been such a
Yeah.
long journey. Yeah.
I don't know. It's
I
a
feel the
great
pain,
story.
but yeah.
Yay for Stephen. And thank you
uh,
guys so much for being here. And yeah, and everybody just keep reading. That's what it's
Karen,
about. So
yeah.
congratulations to you
thank
and good luck
you.
with the next
Thanks
book.
so
I'm
much.
sure
Yeah. And
it's going to
cheers.
be
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
cheers.
Woo.
Cheers.
Yeah.
a compounding thing. Cheers to you all. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. Good night.